Hello there. Welcome to this episode of the Changing Minds podcast. Today, I'm going to be speaking to you about the lessons that I've learned over the course of my life. And this is something that I wanted to do because I think that it's always useful to be able to look at your past, your history, your experiences, and find ways to be able to leverage and alchemize from those experiences you've had, both good and bad, and to be able to transmute them, transmute them, which word is the right word to use, but create from the chaos that you experience something magical and wonderful. And so in this particular episode, what I want to do is go through with you a number of lessons I've learned over the course of my life from the various different mentors, both formal and informal mentors I've had. And hopefully by doing so, provide you with some lessons that you can learn from this episode. You see? So I'll be mentoring you while you are listening to me talk about my own mentoring experiences. First of all, what is a mentor? A mentor is someone who really, through a combination of instruction, training, teaching, and coaching, helps you to be able to master some lessons, to be able to become more effective at something. And in this case, we're going to be talking about becoming more effective at life, to be really good at living. So I think that's always good, isn't it? Anywho, let's get straight into it. And we'll start off with one of the earliest lessons that I learned. And this was when I was a teenager. So I was in my early teenage years. For those of you who don't know, I struggle quite a lot with my own mental health. Struggle with depression. I struggle with stress. I struggle with anxiety. I was even suicidal for a couple of years there. And during that time, I was very much in a dark place. I had a friend that I used to go play football with, go for runs with, play tennis with. He was a couple of years older. And whenever I go around to his house and call in to him while we're going for a run or whatnot, every time he would walk past the mirror on his way out the door, he would always look in the mirror and compliment himself in some way. And I would always tease him or slag him about that and joke with him about that. But as he always did it, it became something that I started to experiment with myself. So in other words, I would start to talk to myself in the mirror, complimenting myself in a really positive way. So I'd walk out of the house. Obviously, no one else was around when I did this, but I'd look in the mirror and I'd say, "Oh, Owen, you look so great." Now, this was, mind you, when I was at my absolute worst. This is when I hated myself. I hated my life. I hated everything. But I would still sort of, let's say, flirt with myself in that way. I learned to do that from him. And again, he didn't teach me it per se, but it was something I watched him do. And those of you who are parents, for example, will know that you're always going to have much more of an influence over your children in terms of what you do than what you tell them to do. So, for example, the way in which you handle stress is going to be much more educational for your children than what you tell them they should do when they're trying to handle stress. So for me, watching my friend do that was a wonderful lesson that I learned to this day. So that's the first lesson, is flirt with yourself. Another lesson that I wanted to share comes from my, I suppose, most famous mentor, Dr. Richard Bandler, the co-creator of NLP, the creative genius really behind NLP. I've been very fortunate to write a number of books with Richard over the years. We started our collaboration together in 2002, and we've since worked on 7 different books together. 6 of them we've co-authored, and I've learned a massive amount from Richard. I mean, to describe the difference that Richard's made in my life would take a lot more than one episode. But there's a few lessons that stand out from what Richard shared with me over the years. And the first one was when he said to me very early on in my career, he said, do as many different things in as many different places with as many different people as you can. In other words, hunt for the diversity of experiences you can get that will expose you to totally different ways of thinking about the world and totally different ways of experiencing the world. And I really took that to heart. That's what drove me to travel to more than 100 countries. That's what drove me to take on all sorts of adventures, all sorts of challenges, all sorts of experiences. And I am, in many ways, the person that I am largely because of that piece of advice. So once again, the second lesson is do as many different things in as many different places with as many different people as you can. Now, obviously, that's going to be even more valuable and even more useful if you're in a position that you can. For example, I was in my late teens, early 20s when I heard that. So really, I took it to heart and it really made a big difference to me. But nonetheless, searching for a diversity of experiences allows you to be able to see the same situations from multiple perspectives, which is always advantageous. Richard also shared a number of great lines, one-liners, and great elements of wisdom about the past. And he would say the best thing about the past is that it's over. He would say things like the past doesn't define you, that you define yourself. And the best way to predict your future is to create it. Now, I love that statement. The best way to predict your future is to create it. Because so often we try to figure out what's in store for us. And what Richard's sort of saying is he's reminding us of the power we have to choose our attitude, to be able to figure out what we can do, what is under our control, what's at least under our influence, to be able to change the trajectory that our future is going in, which I think is extremely powerful. He also said about the past, the only way to have a better past is to change the way you remember it. Again, this is a gold dust, beautiful one-liner, because if you think about it, so often we struggle with our past. And in many ways, we wish, if only I could have changed this experience. Well, you can't change the experience, but you can change the way you remember it. And that means you being able to recollect and remind yourself of the past experiences you've had, and to start to change the way in which you think about it. A lot of the research out there suggests that when we're able to think through or speak about a traumatic event, for example, the more we talk through it and the more we change the way in which we remember it, the less traumatic it will be for us. And in fact, the less it will negatively impact us. And in many ways, that's what effective therapy, when it's done right, can do. It gets you to remember the particular events that have happened in a different way so that you can start to feel differently about them as well. So some wonderful lessons I learned from Richard over the time that I've spent with him. He also said another great quote, which is real problems require real solutions and imaginary problems require imaginary solutions. And once again, the simplicity of this should not be confusing to us. In many ways, what he's saying is that so often what we try to do is we try to find a real solution to an imaginary problem. In other words, we try to change the outside world for something that's going on inside our head. And what we instead need to do is we need to learn to change the inside of our head. And that will in turn change the inside, or help us to overcome or tackle the inside problem that we face. It's that straightforward. And so often we mix this up. We try to do stuff outside thinking that whatever we do externally is going to change the internal. Now, sometimes it might happen. Sometimes the external actions you take can have an impact upon the way in which you think and feel and believe internally. But more often than not, we need to start internally and start to recognize the difference between the two. Another lesson that I learned from Richard, and it was reiterated to me by another friend or mentor in the world of NLP, the late Anton Raps. Anton was an NLP trainer from years ago that I got to know in the 90s. I became friends with him for a number of years until he sadly passed away. And Anton would continuously remind me about the importance of state being the most important thing. So the state that you're in is so critical for you to be able to make the changes you want. And he would reiterate that to me and tell me how vital it is for you to be able to change my state and create the right kind of state. So I was empowered to do what it is that I needed to do. And he was really reminding me of that lesson from Richard. Richard would constantly say the importance of state. The emotional state you're in, how you feel, will dictate so much more of what you need to be aware of. And in fact, in many ways, when I talk about beliefs, one of the things that I try to share with people is what we call affective realism. And that is that the feelings that we feel often will dictate the model of the world, the set of beliefs that we have at that moment in time. We also have what I call emotional beliefs versus core beliefs. An emotional belief is when you feel something is true, you paint a picture of that kind of world for yourself, and you start to see that as being how things are. And so it's vital for us to recognize that the feelings that we feel will indeed affect the beliefs that we have, as well as the actions we take, as well as how high performing we are. So as you can tell, quite a lot of great lessons there from the wonderful genius, Dr. Richard Bandler. There was other folks in NLP that made a positive difference to me. I learned a lot about language from John Laval. I learned a lot about the meta model from Kathleen Laval, both master trainers and collaborators and co-trainers with Richard. I obviously spent many years, almost 20 years, co-training with the wonderful Brian Colbert in the Irish Institute of NLP, which myself and Brian co-created back in the early 2000s. And Brian is a phenomenal therapist, phenomenal coach, phenomenal master trainer, really, really skilled, one of the best out there in the world, right up there at the very, very top. And Brian is someone who I suppose we shared a lot of lessons with each other over the years and we learned a lot from each other. But one of the best things that I noticed about Brian is how generous he was. And I mean, generous as a person, but also generous in terms of how giving to everyone he met, to clients, to trainees, to participants. He is still to this day extremely generous in the way in which he interacts with people. And he's made a huge difference to many, many people's lives as a result. And that's something that always inspires me. There's also Alessio Roberti, who I worked on a couple of books with and collaborated a lot with over the last 20 years or so. Alessio is someone who started NLP around the same time as me. And I've learned a massive amount from Alessio, and I hope he's learned a lot from me too. But we really have had a great partnership that still continues to this day, where we continuously educate and inspire and entertain each other, quite frankly, about the kind of ideas that we have that spread deeply outside of NLP. We've worked on a lot of projects, not just in the field of NLP. Of course, we've written a couple of co-written a couple of books with Dr. Richard Bandler together, but as well as that, we've also worked on a lot of other ideas outside in the field of business and psychology as well. And Alessio is a terrific business brain as well. I've definitely gotten a lot from him from that perspective. There's another NLP, I suppose he's not a trainer or practitioner, but he was at least someone who came along and assisted a lot of the NLP trainings in Orlando when I would assist as well in the early 2000s. His name was David Northrup, and David was one of these people who never had any ambitions to become a practitioner or a master trainer. He'd done all the courses, but he'd no interest in making it a living. It was just a hobby for him. But he was really great with computers and programming, and David was one of the smartest people I met. He really was terrific, and I learned so much from just spending time with him. He was someone that I connected with a lot. He was someone that I spent a lot of time with. We'd go for lunch together. He truly was one of my closest friends in the seminars when I would go over there. I always looked forward to seeing them. And very sadly, he passed away a few years after I'd last seen him. But I still remember the last time that I did see him. We went for lunch during one of the lunch breaks, and he gave me a piece of wisdom and advice that really changed my life, to be honest with you. And the piece of advice, which I think might be useful for many of you out there, is we talked about, I was asking him questions like I always did. Since I got into NLP, one of my superpowers was I was super curious. I still am. But I would ask everyone the question. So I was only a teenager when I got into the field of NLP. So as an assistant, I would drill everybody with questions. I would ask them all questions. I would try to figure out the answers. So instead of me trying to show how much I know, I would be busy trying to learn as much as I possibly could from everyone. And I remember asking David questions for his advice on different things. And I would always do this. And he turned to me and he said, in a very sort of compassionate way, he said, you need to stop asking everybody else for their opinion on things. He said, there's times for that, of course, but you need to realize that your opinion matters and that you know a lot more than you're giving yourself credit for. As long as you keep looking outside for the answers, you're going to struggle. You need to start to trust what comes from the inside of you. You need to remind yourself you've got a lot more answers than you think. Now that shifted things massively for me, and it really changed the trajectory that I was on, because once again, I was struggling a lot with doubting myself and trying to figure out, am I too young to be able to do the kinds of things that I was doing? And when I had that conversation with David, it changed the way in which I was thinking about everything. And from that moment on, I became focused on being able to not just learn more, but also to be applying what it is that I had learned and to be able to share the wisdom that I'd learned with others in a more thorough way. It also made me a lot more confident in the decisions that I made in my career, not to mention my life as well. So it was a terrifically monumental experience and event for me. Outside of NLP, and by the way, I have lots of other friends, lots of other colleagues and trainers that I've worked with over the years who I owe a great debt to in terms of the lessons I've learned. But I've learned a lot outside of the field of NLP as well. Obviously, I have a massive amount of friends that have taught me many lessons. There's been so many clients that have taught me lessons as well. There's people that I get on very well with. There's trolls and people I don't get on so well with that I've learned lessons from. To me, I try to alchemize everything and try to turn it into something that's valuable and something that's useful. But the reality is that I also was very much influenced by the work of Robert Anton Wilson. And Robert Anton Wilson, I only met him once, and that was at a seminar that he did with Dr. Richard Bandler and John Laval in 2000 in Anaheim, California, on neurohypnotic repatterning, one of Richard's creations. And Robert Anton Wilson, read his books, and I've always been a huge fan of him. But I suppose the main lesson that I learned from Robert Anton Wilson was the notion of probabilistic thinking when it comes to reality. Is that whenever we perceive this notion of the map is not the territory, right, which is coined by Alfred Korzybski in his book Science and Sanity back in the 1930s. But this notion that we build a map of the world, and that map is different to our experience of the world. Well, the way in which Robert Anton Wilson described this was, he described how the way in which we think about the world, we make probabilistic estimations of what's going on. And so we create a sort of a guess in our mind of what we think is happening. And when you recognize that your model of the world, your map of the world, the way you think, what he called your reality tunnel, is just a guess. It's just a estimation of what you think might be going on. It makes it a lot easier for you to be able to alter and change your beliefs. And in fact, when I talk about belief leadership, a large part of belief leadership is recognizing the stories we tell ourselves and recognizing the potential errors that we forget about and that we just ignore in cultivating and creating these kinds of stories. And so with this notion of that the map is not the territory, and we think or create a model of reality, and that model is what we think is probably going on, it really helped me to be able to not fall into the limiting beliefs trap as much as I was beforehand. So that lesson about life is many ways an experience of us making estimations or guesses based on what we probably think is happening. And when you're able to recognize that, you can avoid making those mistakes and recognize that maybe you're wrong, and maybe you can look at things from a different perspective as well. So very, very powerful. I also learned from my mentor in university when I was studying psychology. My mentor, that was my supervisor for my master's thesis, which I did on gurus and persuasion. And in it, my supervisor was Dr. Elizabeth Dunn. And Elizabeth was a phenomenal influence to me, a really great mentor. She helped me to figure out academia really, really well and helped me to understand what they were looking for. And also, she was a lot more open to my style of, as I suppose, who I was as a student. In many ways, I got myself into sort of mischief whenever I was in university. I would always challenge lecturers and tutors. I would always have something to say. And Elizabeth saw this, and instead of dismissing it, she always encouraged me. But she also encouraged me to try to create change from the inside. So I had obviously very strong opinions, having been also studying hypnosis and NLP at the time. So I wasn't, I suppose, drinking the full Kool-Aid from some of the psychology professors. And I had a lot of opinions at the time. So she helped me to understand the best way forward is to be able to do what I can to create change from the inside out. And in the time I got to know her, sadly, she passed away as well. But she made a remarkable difference to the way in which I suppose, interacted with psychology from there on in. I also was very much influenced over the last few years by Robert McKee. Robert McKee is the screenwriting guru, incredible expert on storytelling. And he's worked with a lot of Oscar winners and Emmy award winners, screenwriters, whatnot. And Bob is someone who I got to spend a good bit of time with and got to learn a lot from him about how stories work. I got to visit him and his beautiful wife, Mia, and I got to interview him in multiple times on the podcast. And I really did learn a lot about how stories work in a very, very technical way, which has since helped me, once again, in the work that I've been doing to try to map on all of this story theory and apply it to the stories we tell ourselves or the stories we're told by others that influence the way in which we think. So the notion of inner propaganda or the notion of belief leadership, of both being influenced not just by a lot of the psychological learnings I've gotten, but also from the lessons and learnings from the world of story as well. So again, Bob McKee is a great mentor for me. And also I learned a lesson about marketing, a great lesson about marketing from someone I hired recently, as a marketing consultant, Mark Levy is the person who helped Simon Sinek figure out his big idea, right? To start with why. In fact, Simon, in a testimonial to Mark, said that Mark helped him find his why. And in many ways, Mark did the same thing for me. He spent a lot of time working with me. One of the best lessons I learned from Mark was this notion of an icebreaker, is that when you're looking for the big idea, one of the things you need to realize is the big idea does not have to be all encompassing. So your big idea does not have to cover everything you do. The metaphor he'd like to give is that it's like an icebreaker that's breaking through the ice. And as it breaks through the ice, it brings with it behind another ship with lots more ideas. So the icebreaker's job is just to get you in the door. The icebreaker's job is to give people a clear understanding as to what you talk about, what you stand for. And then you can, once you've gotten in the door, then you can start to open up people's minds to the other things that you can do with the other elements that you covered. And that was the first time that I really understood how I could have my cake and eat it, right? How I could, on the one hand, have a big idea, but on the other hand, not let go of the 6 gazillion ideas that I also have in my head. And that's one of the challenges, I think, when you have a lot of ideas in your head, and my brain is all over the place with too many things going on a lot of times. And to have that metaphor made a huge difference to the way in which I was thinking about everything. And so over the years, I've got a lot of lessons, but probably the greatest lesson of all came from the greatest mentors of all. And this is my parents, my mother and father, who I'm exceptionally close to. And they have influenced me more than anybody else on the planet by a long shot. And the core things that I've learned from them really haven't been in the form of actual lessons. I've learned lots of actual lessons from them both. But primarily the 2 things that I got from them more than anything. One was belief, and that is they believed in me. And I think that when you have somebody in your life that believes in you, oftentimes that's what matters more than anything. You need that belief. One of the things that we can all do is try to do our best in believing in the people that we work with. So as a therapist, as a coach, as a trainer, one of the things you can do is a great gift you can give to the people you work with is to believe in them more than they believe in themselves. And that belief will become contagious. And so my parents, by believing in me, gave me a lot of strength and a lot of belief in myself. And then the other thing, which is again crucial, is the greatest lesson of all is not knowledge or wisdom or information. I believe the greatest lesson of all comes from love. And that is that when we feel loved, when we feel that someone loves us unconditionally, when we feel the enormity of that, that gives us a sort of power that allows us to be able to overcome anything. Many years ago, when I was suicidal, the thing that really helped me to survive was the love that I felt from them. The fact that they loved me so much was the thing that helped me to change the way in which I was thinking at that moment in time. And it wasn't the only thing, and it wasn't any sort of knowledge or wisdom that changed things. It was the feeling that transformed everything. And I think when you want to be able to make a change in your life, love is one of the secret powers, the superpowers rather, that can help you to do that. God, this has got very, OTT, isn't it? Very over the top, very like, love is the answer, love is everything. I start here in my head, I'm starting to hear like that song, love, 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 love. I'll not do that again, I promise. Anyway, the point is that love is the answer. And on that note, I will bid you farewell, my dear friends. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that you continue to be well. I hope the force is strong with you. May the force be with you and continue to be with you. And may you continue to believe better. Until the next time, bye for now.